keystone concept number one is don't trade your time for money, because time is more valuable. You can always make money. You can't make time.
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association, providing benefits and services to real estate investors and rental property owners for over 48 years. With your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group.
This episode is sponsored by Green Property Management, now offering a $250 per unit project allowance to new clients in West Michigan. Find out more at livegreenlocal.com. And RCB and Associates, helping real estate investors and small business owners navigate the complex world of health insurance and Medicare benefits at rcbassociatesllc.com. Hello and welcome to episode 326. My good friend Matt Picheny is back on the show today. You may remember Matt as a successful syndicator of multifamily and Broadway shows such as Hamilton and Moulin Rouge. Matt just released a new book that he wrote called Backstage Guide to Real Estate, which follows Matt's journey from buying a starter home to flipping houses to apartment syndications. The book has already made its way to number one on Amazon. Currently, Matt is focused on developing passive income streams that enable investors to write their own story and choose how they want to spend their time. Matt, welcome back to the show.
Oh, Brian, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me. 320 some odd episodes. It's incredible.
That's 6 years of podcasts every Monday.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And speaking of congratulations are in order for you because not only do you have a new book that will be out by the time that this episode airs, but you also won a couple awards, which, you know me, I'm a big Hamilton fan. I'm a big Broadway fan. I'm a big fan of the shows that you've invested in. Tell us what you won.
Since we last spoke, the last time we talked, we had a couple of shows that were running on Broadway. Two that my wife and I had co-produced, Moulin Rouge and American Utopia. And since that time and now, we were fortunate enough that both of those shows won Tony Awards. So we are now two-time Tony Award-winning producers, which is really cool. So that was very exciting.
Congratulations. I also just have to say that we're going to see Hamilton on Sunday here in Grand Rapids, a traveling show. So you're going to make some money off of me.
I might make a penny or two. I'm just a very, very small investor in that one. But yeah, I mean, love the show. It's so great. And I think you're going to have an awesome time, Brian. Enjoy the show.
For those of you listening, if you didn't hear Matt's conversation with me, it was probably 30, 40 episodes ago. We talked about investing, how you've been investing in Broadway shows and how those are syndications, just like any real estate syndication. A little different model, but still the same in concept. And you've been very successful in that area as well. But what we're here to talk about today is your new book,
which ties the two together.
Tell us how it ties them together.
The book is called Backstage Guide to Real Estate. And so the backstage part of it is sort of a nod to my background as an actor. I used to be an actor. And that's really what this book is. It takes you on my journey from being an actor, full-time actor, to now a full-time real estate investor. And all the different things that I learned along the way. I have 18 different keystone concepts that I learned on my journey that I share with the reader, along with I have 60 different real estate terms that are defined in the book and easy to understand language. And the book starts just like I did, a complete novice, not knowing anything. It talks about very basic concepts like cash flow and what's an asset and what's a liability in the earlier chapters. And then as I grew in my career, the topics that we discuss become more and more advanced. And at the end of the book, we're talking about air rights deals and 1031 exchanges. So it sort of runs the gamut, I think, of real estate.
Who did you write this book for? Who did you have in mind when you were writing it?
Are you familiar with Meetup?
Absolutely.
So do you have any idea how many million users that they have on the platform?
I would imagine Meetup has hundreds of millions of users.
I think I checked it the other day. It was like 184 million, something like that. It's huge number of people that are on there. And I was one of them. And I had a meetup group in Boston. So I was living in Boston. I'm in New York City now, but I was living in Boston. And I ran a meetup group and it got really popular. And we would have over 100 people on average at any one of our events. Sometimes we'd have over 200 people. Now, it took about 4 years to grow it that large. It took a long time. But we got to a point where there was just a lot of people coming, and it was a lot of people who owned small multifamily or was interested in small multifamily in the Boston area. What happened over time was that people from the content that we were bringing, we would have many speakers come. I would speak once in a while, sharing information about investing in real estate. And, the Northeast isn't necessarily the biggest cash flow market, right? So people started, I think, to feel a bit more comfortable with investing out of state and maybe investing in deals that they weren't active in, but they were a passive investor in. And a lot of these people would come to me and say, hey, Matt, I'm thinking about investing in this deal. What do you think? Would you look at this deal? Will you tell me should I do this deal or not? And I would never tell anybody whether an investment was right for them or wrong for them. But what I would do is sit down with them and look through the underwriting and show them the things that I would have questions about. Brian, as you know, 2/3 of my portfolio are deals that I'm a passive investor in, and then another third are the deals that I actively manage. So I think a lot of the people who came to my meetup knew that too, knew that I looked at deals sort of from both sides of the coin and could give them some good advice. What ended up happening was there were so many people wanting to do this. It was taking up so much of my time. And I love helping people, but there was no time in the day for me to do my own stuff. I was just sitting around helping people so much. I decided to write it down. And so that was really sort of the main impetus for the book. What I did was I wrote down about a 70 to 80 page book. That was probably the most boring thing you've ever read in your entire life. Now, Brian, you're an expert in real estate, so I think that you might not find it necessarily so boring. But most of the people who were going to my meetup, people who were interested in investing in real estate, did a bit of it, but we're not full-time. They had another full-time job. This book was to hopefully give them some information, but it was just too dense and too dry, which is when I decided to go ahead and take it and put it into sort of that narrative format that we talked about earlier, where I tell stories and hopefully I try to inject a lot of humor into the book, because real estate can be a dry subject and I didn't want this to be a boring textbook. So it became a book that was easy for anybody, usually working professionals who are interested in investing passively, to go ahead and read and gain some insight. So that's really who this book is geared towards.
What are some of the stories you tell? And also, I'm wondering, how does this correlate with your acting career and kind of that backstage ethos that you're bringing into the book there?
So I have those keystone concepts that I talked about. One of those is keystone concept number 2 in my book is all about persistence. Julie Andrews is quoted with saying that persistence is failing 19 times and getting up on the 20th, right? So it's really important. And so Julie Andrews, there you go. That's already a theater background. But I tell some stories in the book about persistence. And I'll share one right now that is around theater and acting. And it's actually the first job that I ever got in theater. Had to do with a show that I had auditioned for. And it was actually my first ever professional audition in New York City. I went out and I auditioned and I got a call back and I didn't hear from them. And then I got a phone call a few weeks later offering me a role. And I found out in talking with the director that what actually had happened was I made it to the callback. So, for those listeners who aren't familiar too much with the theatrical world or auditioning in general, a lot of times you'll audition for a show and there may be hundreds of people trying out for a particular part, and they'll narrow it down to a smaller group and ask you to come back at a later time. So I had made it and into a callback round. So there was probably about 5 to 10 of us at this point. And throughout that day, the group got smaller and smaller. And I think it was down to about 3 of us at the end. I never heard. But what I did was I sent a postcard, which was something that I did after every audition to follow up. That's a little bit of persistence there. And what ended up happening, they offered the role to somebody else. And for whatever reason, the person ended up turning down the role. This was probably about a week after that callback. And that was the exact same day that my postcard arrived in the mail. So that was the thing. They get on the phone. This guy backs out. They check the mail. Boom, there's a postcard for me. And they're like, oh yeah, I remember this guy. And he auditioned and he was really good. And he was at the callback and he made it down to the very end. So they ended up giving me the role. And so I have a few different stories like that even talk more and more about persistence. That was probably the shortest example, but that's an example in the acting world, how I learned something that has kept me going. And interestingly enough, when I look at my real estate deals, almost every single deal that I've gotten involved in as an active investor has some sort of persistence component to it.
If I may just read into that a little further, that fact that you had that persistence and that follow-up and the way that the first choice turned down the role, they got your card in the mail, and then immediately you're at the forefront of their mind. So that's how you got the role. There's really no difference between that and when you're bidding on buying a property. There's always a number of people who are trying to buy that property. And somehow through persistence, if you can keep yourself at the forefront of the seller's mind, that quite often that will go a long way toward helping you be the one who ends up buying that property.
Yeah, I mean, I've gotten into situations where we bid on a property, we made it into best and final, which I consider the callback, right? So we get into that best and final situation and we make a final offer. And for one reason or another, we do not get the property. And then I've had it come back where all of a sudden I get a call from a broker, true story, 30 days later. Hey, we are going back to the best and final round of people. Matt, I think that you are the most qualified for this role, not for this role, sorry, for this property, getting them mixed up now, but, for this property. And, let me tell you some of the things that the seller's concerned about. Maybe you can, allay some of their fears, and maybe you could be the person that's in position to win the property. And it did happen. And we ended up getting that property. So that stuff happens in real life all the time.
What are some other stories that you can tell from like that backstage, either in your book or in life, from that backstage, as an actor, that kind of correlate in similar ways to being a real estate investor?
There's so many different correlations between the acting world and the real estate investing world. Maybe I'm just really good at connecting the dots, but there's just been so many things that I've learned throughout my life that I always try to apply to newer situations. When it comes to the theater and the real estate world, you talked about the fact that they're both syndications. And when you look at them and you look at the underwriting on them and the way things are structured, there's so many different parallels. So that's one of the things from the acting world, specific things that I learned that have made me successful in real estate really has to do with sort of the follow-up that we talked about, the persistence and not giving up. As an actor, I went in for, I was super fortunate, right? The first audition that I went in, I ended up getting, but it was a children's theater tour, right? It wasn't like I was performing in Rent on Broadway or something like that, right? But I didn't even get that role until I had already done like another 15 or 20 other auditions. And the same thing was true. I just kept doing audition after audition after audition. And I do that with real estate. I stick to a niche. I'm interested in investing in multifamily, but I look at deal after deal after deal. Most of the deals that I look at, it's not right for, right? It's not the right opportunity for me for one reason or another. Then I narrow the field a little bit. And then I'm looking at apartment deals that would make sense, that do fit my strategy. So the same thing with the theater, right? I would look at all these casting calls, but they're looking for 10-foot tall women, or something that just totally is not me, right? I'm short and I'm a guy. So, I wouldn't go after that. But any auditions where there was even a chance that there was something that was right for me, I would go out on them. It's the same thing for the real estate world. When I was an actor, all I really cared about was that callback. There was a number of reasons why I might not get a role that were beyond my control. I knew that if I got a call back that I had done a strong audition, I performed well, enough to pique their interest and want them to see more about me. And then there's so many other factors that get involved. I mean, let's say I'm a short guy and I'm pretty young looking, and especially back then in my 20s, I looked like I was a teenager. So a lot of times I might get cast as someone's son. Well, the role might be between me and I have dark hair and there's a blonde headed guy, and the person that they end up casting for the people who be playing my parents are blondes. I'm probably not going to get the role. It's probably going to go to the blonde headed guy because he looks more like them, right? There's a number of reasons why I might not get something that's beyond my control. I think the same thing goes with the real estate. I'm trying to put in an offer for property, but let's say there's another buyer and the buyer's offering all cash. They're going to buy the, $10 million property, all cash, $10 million. Here you go. We'll close next Thursday. I can't compete with that. It's just never going to happen. I'm always buying something. There's financing behind it. I mean, there's a lot of equity too, probably like $2 to $3 million, but not $10 million. So, and I syndicate my deals. So I'm pooling amongst many different investors. So there's a number of reasons why I might get into a best and final round, which is the same as the callback, but not get the property awarded to me. And I'm okay with that. I have to be okay with that. I have to be able to face that rejection, right? Not take it personally and move on to the next thing. So that's one of the things that I learned from the acting world that has translated directly into real estate.
Anyone who listens to this show knows that Green Property Management manages my entire West Michigan residential portfolio. They manage single families all the way up to large apartment complexes. Marty and his team are running a new special that I think is absolutely nuts. And I tried to tell him so, but he wouldn't listen to me. They want to offer new clients a $250 per unit project allowance to have their in-house licensed crew tackle any project, big or small, for new clients. I can tell you from personal experience that their unique management style will save you money, eliminate headaches, and increase your net operating income. You add on top of that this limited time offer of $250 per unit for new clients, and it really becomes a no-brainer. So text GREEN250 to 21000 or visit them on the web at livegreenlocal.com and tell Marty I think he's gone off the deep end with this absolutely nuts $250 offer. If you're thinking of leaving your W-2 job and becoming a full-time real estate investor, one of the greatest costs you must consider is healthcare for you and your family. When I made this transition myself, I found the whole healthcare insurance process to be confusing and frustrating. That's why I'm glad I met Chad Creasy at RCB and Associates. Chad is a professional health insurance agent who helps real estate investors and small business owners understand and choose their best healthcare options. And best of all, his services are covered by the insurance company and won't cost you a dime. If you live in Michigan and are expecting a change in your healthcare insurance coverage for any reason, or losing employer coverage or transitioning into Medicare, then you owe it to yourself to contact Chad Creasy at rcbassociatesllc.com. I'm always fascinated by that correlation there between your previous life as an actor and what you're doing now as a real estate investor, which seems completely different, but there's a lot of crossover. And I found the same thing coming from a marketing background. I spent 20 years marketing Hollywood movies, cutting movie trailers, TV commercials for films. And I see so much crossover and similarity in the process, the way you work, the way you market to the seller, because you want to market yourself to the seller. You want to then market the opportunity to investors. There's a lot of crossover for me. I have one more question along those lines. So having been an actor and possibly still being an actor, I guess once an actor, always an actor, huh?
All the world's a stage, as William Shakespeare said.
And your stage now is the real estate stage. What skills as an actor do you bring to that stage?
I also think part of it is being able to speak and being comfortable speaking with people, whether it's, right now it's one-on-one, right? You and I, but eventually we know this podcast is going to be heard by, thousands, maybe tens or hundreds of thousands of people. And you have to be comfortable with that. And that is something I'm very comfortable with. I think having been on stage so much. I mean, I always get nervous. I always get excited about these things, being up on stage in front of people, but it's something that I am excited about, comfortable with. A little butterflies, definitely. But but comfortable getting up and doing. And, marketing and selling a product, and in this case, selling yourself, it's probably the hardest product to sell, right? So those skills, I think being able to speak, being comfortable with people are things that I bring to bear. I mean, when I was acting, I was never underwriting real estate deals. I wasn't like in an Excel spreadsheet doing that kind of stuff. So those are different skills that I bring to the table as well.
But you do have there is an edge that you have from your acting background, because that does allow you to portray perhaps more confidence, more skill, and convey that in a way that people will respond to. I'd like to switch gears and focus a little bit more on the real estate. You talked about the type of apartment investing you do and how you were guiding other people who had a lot of questions for you. And that's part of the reason you wrote the book. Tell us what a reader of your book can expect as far as knowledge about investing in real estate.
I do have the 18 different keystone concepts that I mentioned. I'll delve into those in a second. And there's also 60 different real estate terms that I define in the book. Things, whether, we're talking about cap rates or interest rates or depreciation, just really running the whole gamut. And there's a lot of, I think, knowledge people can get just from that. At the back of the book, I have a glossary where the reader can go ahead and I envision this book as something that people will keep on their bookshelf and be able to pull down when they're looking at a deal. So the book is divided into, there's really 13 chapters, because there's an introduction and an epilogue, and then there's 11 chapters of the book. And then there's a back section to the book called the Backstage Toolbox. Inside the Backstage Toolbox, there's 4 components. One is a thing I call quickly sizing up a syndication, which is a way that an investor can take a look at something, and it breaks down the deal into 3 components: the sponsor, the market, and the deal itself. And it has, for each of those 5 questions, the ways that those questions could be answered. So these are questions that you want to ask, and it gives a guide in the back, like, hey, here's a thumbs up type of answer. Here's a keep your fingers crossed type of answer. And here's a thumbs down, like turn around and run away from this deal kind of answer, so that investors can sort of gauge how they might feel about something. And then the second section is called the Backstage Tour of Syndications. And that gets really nitty gritty. We talk about all the legal aspects of a syndicated deal. We talk about what I call the 4 fudgeable factors, which are cap rates, income growth, expenses, and financing, and how to look at those 4 things to make sure a deal is really underwritten in a conservative manner. The third section is just a recap of all of those 18 keystone concepts, which is interesting now that you've read the whole book to just read them in succession. And then the last section is that glossary where you've got those 60 terms. And then inside of it, it also acts as an index. It tells you what page we discussed that term, so that if you're looking at a deal or you come across this term in the future, you can take out the book, find it, read what the definition is. And if you still don't remember everything, you can go back to page 157 and read that little section again to refresh your mind on the story and how that came about and how I experienced that in the past, which will hopefully give people a really good understanding of what these definitions are, rather than just, because you could also just Google them, I guess. But this hopefully gives some more background around it. And then the keystone concepts that we talk about, and we start at the beginning. The first keystone concept is that time is more valuable than money. Keystone concept number 1 is don't trade your time for money, because time is more valuable. You can always make money. You can't make time. Time is finite, right? And so if you can figure out the things that you want to do with your time and not have to worry about money, but you could invest your money into multiple types of passive income that is coming to you on a regular basis, you don't have to trade your time for dollars anymore. You have your time to do what you want, what's fulfilling to you, which I hope is going to be something that benefits humanity, benefits your family, benefits your community. And that's something that I talk about in the book. That's something that's important to me, is being able to, invest my time. You and I, Brian, we're in a mastermind, right? And so in that mastermind, there's a lot of people doing things. And we helped someone just a few weeks ago when we met together raise tens of thousands of dollars for a charitable cause he was working on. But there's another guy in our group who is very into wildlife and like animals. Like that's his thing. I'm not a big animal guy. I mean, I like animals as much as the next guy, but I'm not like an animal lover. He's like an animal lover. He's just really passionate about animals. And he has generated enough passive income where he has some free time, some extra time. And he uses that time devoted towards those type of efforts where it's about wildlife and preservation and things like that, which is awesome. And so creating that time is super valuable. And then I get as you know, some of those keystone concepts are more aspirational like that, right? Or the persistence one. And then I have some that are very nitty gritty, like cash flow is king. That's keystone concept number 5, which is based on a lesson that I learned from my father when I bought my first apartment, my first thing in real estate. My father said to me, Matt, you'll never lose money in real estate if you never have to sell. And it's really simple, but it's really profound. And it didn't really hit me until I was in the middle of the recession, the Great Recession brought on in 2008, when I saw my apartment. It was my primary residence, but it was an apartment that I owned that had gone up in value over a couple of years, sink all the way back down to where I had bought it at. Now, I was very lucky, and I was in really good shape because a lot of people at that time saw their value of their property sink below where they had initially bought it for, and they were underwater. And a lot of people lost homes because of that. I thankfully was gainfully employed, and I had a number of good years prior to that in the market where I saw the appreciation. So when it went down, I wasn't really underwater, but it took years and years for it to get back up. And so all I needed to worry about at that time was not what the value of the apartment was. That didn't really matter. What mattered was I had to make that mortgage payment so I didn't lose the property. Because if I was going to lose the property, then I would have to sell it and potentially have a loss. But if I could continue to live in that place, or if it's a place that you don't live in, but it's an investment property, as long as you have tenants there and you can still make that debt service payment, you should be okay. And so that's keystone concept number 5.
You'll never lose money in real estate if you don't have to sell. And you didn't have to sell back during the Great Recession because you were making enough money from cash flow to pay that mortgage.
I was making enough money because it was my primary residence. I was gainfully employed, right? So I was able to have enough income coming in from that I was able to make that mortgage payment, even though the value was, could have actually been less. I mean, I say that it went back down to where it was. That was based on my estimation. But if I actually had to sell it and bring it to the market, who knows what would have fetched at that particular time? I could have lost a couple bucks. I don't think I would have lost a ton just because it had gone up so much in value for several years preceding that.
What's your favorite part of the book? What's your favorite story or favorite section of the book?
Oh, that's not fair. I don't know that I could pick one. It starts off with the jolts. Brian, where were you in 2001?
I was in Los Angeles working in movie marketing.
I was working in New York City, and I was doing the digital marketing thing. And while 9/11 was the big event towards the end of the year, at the beginning of the year, we had the big .com bubble burst, right? And so the tech world was collapsing. And my business, being that I was in digital marketing, I had my own little boutique agency doing it, was imploding. Like my business was just failing big time. And then I got a call from my landlord and told me that the apartment that I was renting where I lived, I had 90 days to get out of. So here I am, New York City. The world is collapsing as far as I'm concerned, right? The digital marketing world is collapsing. My clients are going out of business. The ones that are not spending money on digital, and I need to find a place to live. I didn't know how I was going to do this. I mean, this was crazy for me to try to figure something out. I ended up being able to get a job at Showtime, the cable television channel. They were a client of mine. They offered me a position in-house. And instead of renting an apartment on the Upper West Side, which is where I wanted to live, I made a compromise and moved much further north, about 30 minutes further north, up into Washington Heights, because my sister lived up there and she saw a note on a bulletin board for a co-op apartment for sale. I bought that apartment. A little over 2 years later, I sold that apartment and I more than quadrupled my initial equity investment. And that's when the light bulb went off in my head and said, wow, this real estate stuff, this is really powerful. How do I do it again? Right? Like, that was incredible. I want more. So that's what really started me down the path of real estate as something that I wanted to invest in. And that's a pretty interesting and powerful story because it's emotionally charged for me because I lived it. And that's the beginning of chapter 2 of the book, actually. And initially it was chapter 1, but then as I wrote it and put it together, it made more sense to make it chapter 2.
When people read your book, The Backstage Guide to Real Estate, what do you hope that they're able to do once they've read your book?
I hope that people will, number one, it'll become clear to them why investment in real estate is a good choice. I think a lot of people hear that it's a good choice, but don't necessarily understand why. So I'm hoping that the book explains why, and also really explains to people how to do. I mean, I told you the meetup group, that's why I wrote this book, was for those people. And there was a lot of people who just didn't know how to look at deals. And I think that there's a lot of deals out there nowadays. And some of them, Brian, you and I talked about this at length when I saw you recently, right? About, what's going on with the market today. The real estate market is very heated, right? Some think it's quite frothy. So what's going to happen moving forward? Everybody says, and I believe, that long-term real estate can be a really great investment, but shorter term, there could be ups and downs. And so I want to help people realize that cash flow is super important, right? Cash flow is king. That's one of the things, because no matter where the market goes, cash flow is important, but also understand how to look at these deals, how important it is the person that's running the deal, right? I mean, that's, like I said, there's 3 things: the sponsor, the market, and the deal. The most important one is the sponsor. And I tell stories about how I've done deals that didn't do well and deals that have done well. And that I learned, wow, that's when I learned, hey, this sponsor is really important. I had a deal that was tanking and the sponsor got us through it. We didn't make a lot of money. We made a teeniest bit of profit. I don't think it didn't even really keep up with inflation, but we didn't lose money based on the exact amount I put in. I got back a little bit more, but that's all because of that sponsor. And so that's when it became really clear to me how important that person was. And so through the book, I teach these concepts, these ways to look at deals. It's sort of, the cover, I got it right here, but the cover, I don't know if everybody watches this on video or audio, but if in case you can't see this right now, it's the curtain being pulled back, right? I'm basically pulling back the curtain and showing you what's going on. I almost like that Wizard of Oz metaphor, like, oh, don't look behind the curtain, right? It's what's going on, the mechanics behind that deal. There are things that somebody can do to underwriting that can make something look a little more, wow, look at this great return, right? But the question is, how did they get to that return? And so this book hopefully gives people that just a little bit of knowledge. It's not tremendous. It's not rocket science, but the little few things that you're going to want to look at to really understand if a deal is something that you feel comfortable with.
How would people find out more about you or get a hold of you? And once again, please promote your book.
All of those things are available on my website, and that's Picheny.com. I'll spell it real quick. P like in Peter, ICHENY.com. So Picheny.com. I'm sure you'll probably put a link to that in the show notes, Brian. But on my website, you can download the book. You can reach out to me. I've got a great newsletter that has investor tips that comes out every month. So yeah, that's the place. Oh, and my blog, I'm writing all these articles that have great free information on real estate investing. So check it out.
So the book is Backstage Guide to Real Estate. It's available on Amazon as well, right?
It is. It's available everywhere books are sold.
I'm really looking forward to it. And I enjoyed the stories that you shared from it. And I'm looking forward to also getting your wisdom out of the book as well on real estate investing. And also, just one more time, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see the Tony Awards behind Matt's back. Congratulations on that. That's really impressive and incredible. Thank you. Thanks for being on the show, Matt.
Brian, it was an absolute pleasure. I love chatting with you. I really do. You're such a wealth of knowledge when it comes to real estate. It's always a wonderful time. And this time we got to record it, which was really cool.
I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode. I'm your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group, and you can find out more about me by going to higinvestor.com. That's higinvestor.com. And you can also ask questions and join us on Facebook by going to RPOA, Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast. This episode was sponsored by Green Property Management, now offering a $250 per unit project allowance to new clients in West Michigan. Find out more at livegreenlocal.com. And RCB and Associates, helping real estate investors and small business owners navigate the complex world of health insurance and Medicare benefits at rcbassociatesllc.com.
You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.